Our magazine is El Residente, and I am the editor-in-chief for that. So I'm promoting. It comes out every 2 months. It's an e-magazine now. It used to be printed, but that got too expensive. The current one for January, February is, I think, 62 pages long. If it were printed, it would be a slick paper full-color magazine. So if you go to our website, arcr.cr, what are you trying to tell me, Ivo?
That they will get an email with the link for the last magazine. I will send them all the link for the magazine.
Perfect. But if you go to the website, instead of following his link, click on magazine and you can say all the back issues for years of it. Okay, on to our regular scheduled program. As it says up there, I'm going to talk to you about the culture of Costa Rica. Well, I'm not going to talk to you about all the things that you've read about in the websites or in the guidebooks or things like that. What I'm going to talk to you about are things that you don't read about. By the way, is everybody from North America? No Europeans? Okay. I will use two words that people have in the past taken offense to. Why, I've never been able to figure out. Those words are gringo and gringa, male and female. If I use those words, I do not mean them offensively. They're not derogatory. They're not meant in any sort of derogatory way. It is a shorthand term that we use. It applies to North Americans only, but we use it to refer to expats from everywhere. If you aren't Costa Rican, you aren't a Tico, you are a gringo. Simple as that. Just for your information, I've been here 18 years, and I'm married to a Tica. We have a family. There are 8 of them living in my house right now because 2 of them lost jobs. They're adults. Well, there are 4 grandchildren, but it's a different kind of life than what we are used to. I can assure you that. Consequently, I'm exposed to the Costa Rican culture every day. Well, what do I mean by culture? It is what we start learning when we grow up, wherever we grow up, from our parents, from our siblings, from our schools, from our churches, from everywhere. And it controls and affects the way we live. Well, the same thing goes on here, but this is a different culture. This is a Spanish language culture. It is one with a different set of rules and a different set of laws, and oftentimes different behaviors than what we're used to. Their culture is as good as our culture. It's just sometimes different. They learned it growing up just like we did, and like an iceberg, I took that slide out. Like an iceberg, it's evidenced to us by behavior. Just as they watch our behavior and see our culture. However the culture develops, it is not easy or quick to change. It is what it is. It is ingrained deeply in the population of the people, and it controls the way they act. My purpose here today is to inform you about a few of those differences, because what happens when we encounter them is we have culture shock. Culture shock is simply the difference between the values of a familiar culture and the one that we're used to. I guarantee you that everyone in this room, that includes Ticos and Hollanders and Americans, experience from time to time culture shock. And we will experience it more coming into a different culture than we would if a different culture came to us. So what are some of the signs of culture shock? We got mood swings, depression, homesickness, anger, frustration. It can even manifest itself physically in sickness. Not me this time. Headaches, aches and pains. And they can range from mildly irritating to deeply disturbing. It can last months or even more. As I said, I've been here 18 years, and I still experience culture shock on a nearly daily basis. It's not just my family, it's the people that what's the word I want? I interact with, there we go, that I interact with in the country every day. Because their culture is different than mine, they sometimes think differently than I do. And I'll talk about some of those things a little later as we go on. What are some of the things in Latin culture that we'll encounter? Latins, if I say Ticos, I really mean Latins, are something called conflict averse. It's characteristic throughout all the Latin countries. Latins do not like uncertainty because certain uncertainty can cause a conflict with what they are sure of, what they know, what they've experienced, what their culture taught them. And to counter that, within their own culture, they have designed complicated processes, what we would call complicated processes, for simple problems. If you ever get to the point you want to open a bank account in this country, you will experience it firsthand, because they will ask you about all the possibilities that might ever affect a bank account before they'll open it. Things like, do you have a maid? Now, you're sitting in a bank trying to deposit your money, and they want to know if you have a maid. Their thinking is that if they ask the question now and get the answer, they won't be surprised later going down the road, and that will cause a conflict. To Ticos, the process is often much more important than the results. It can take them a very long, complicated series of operations to accomplish something that is fairly simple. That becomes very frustrating to us who just want to do the thing and go on to something else. If it doesn't work out, hey, we'll come back and we'll fix it. They don't want to have to come back and fix it. Ticos, Latins, do not like to accept responsibility, nor do they like to apologize. Those two are tied very closely together. You see, accepting responsibility is seen as weakness in Latin culture. And if you're weak, you're not macho. And in Latin culture, what do you got to be? You got to be macho. So they say things like, I didn't drop the spoon. It fell out of my hand. The spoon is responsible. Or we didn't have an accident because I ran a stop sign. You got in my way. They will try and transfer responsibility from themselves, no matter how obvious it is, to something or someone else. It shows strength, being macho. Latin cultures are not time-oriented. You know the term mañana? Mañana doesn't mean tomorrow. It means not today. And that's a whole different concept than tomorrow. North Americans like to say things like, time is money. Well, sure it is. We all know that. Time is money. Not to a Tico. Time is free. It's one of the few things in this society that is free, that doesn't come with a cost. Consequently, when we think about time and timeliness, we're thinking in a totally different set of terms than what Ticos are thinking about. They will tell you mañana, or later today, or something like that. And then when that time rolls around, they're nowhere to be found. It's because time really isn't that important. Getting something and taken care of, like an overflowing toilet, does not have the same emergency status for a Tico that it does for us. He will get to it when he gets to it. That frustrates us, that sends us into culture shock. It's somewhat changing, but Ticos embrace noise. They like loud. Loud cars, loud church services, loud televisions, loud conversations, loud. It took me 5 years to get my kids to recognize that there was actually a button on the remote control for the television that made the volume go down. We had a lot of discussions about that. Ticos have a different sense of humor than we do, and quite possibly a better sense of humor than we do. They will give each other nicknames, for example, from very early ages that will last them throughout their whole life. Those names are often terms that we would find politically incorrect. Things like fatty, or skinny, or one eye, or 3 eyes, 4 eyes. And they mean nothing to them. That's their name. That's the way their culture says is okay to call each other. We would go, you call me fatty? I'm going to sue you. You've offended me. It is difficult for a gringo to get a nickname in Costa Rica. I am one of the few that I have ever met that has one. It was given to me by my wife. She calls me Viejo Gringo Stupido. But she says it with love. So how do we deal with culture shock when it happens to us? The biggest thing you can have in your favor is patience. If you have patience, then you can turn it into a learning experience. You can say, oh, I didn't know that. I'll do that differently next time, or I'll understand that reaction is coming next time, or whatever. You can learn from it. By doing that, you're focusing on the positives. Nobody comes here to be miserable. Not anybody I know. So the more you focus on the positives and the more you focus on the negatives, the more unhappy you can become. Focus on the positives and you can have a much more pleasurable time here. Have a sense of humor. That's something that North Americans seem to have lost, particularly about themselves. If you come here, try and regain that sense of humor. Be able to laugh at yourself. God, was that stupid? I should have known better than that. So what? And don't complain. If you complain, you become a victim. If you become a victim, you become unhappy. I will caution you that there are some people that do not belong here. They don't fit. They cannot accept the culture. They cannot understand or accept the ambiguities, the ambivalence, the delays. Those people are generally type A personalities. If you're a type A, I have a recommendation for you. When you leave this seminar, go to your room, pack your bag, catch a taxi, go to the airport, and go home. Don't stay here. You won't be happy. You just won't be. Most people that do leave here, and the embassy thinks unofficially it's about 50% of the people who come here to live, only stay here 2 to 3 years, maybe less. It's because they cannot adapt. They can't accept the differences. It's not because they couldn't find good health care or the proper housing or the people weren't friendly. It's strictly from the culture. This culture made them uncomfortable. So how do you adjust? The first one's so obvious. Bring a book. You're going to stand in line. You're going to wait someplace. You're going to be sitting in a rank of chairs that are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up through 18 or 20, and every time number 1 gets to go do whatever it is that they're doing, everybody is going to move down a chair till eventually you get to number 1, and that can take an hour or 2 hours. Healthcare, banks, government offices are notorious for that sort of thing. So bring a book. Doesn't matter whether it's electronic, on your cell phone, iPad, or a regular hardcover book. I keep one in my car all the time. The thicker the better, because the longer the book lasts. Learn to be intentionally late. That has been a real difficult one for me. My mother was late for everything her whole life, including, and this is true, her own funeral. I am retired military, 23 years. You can kind of imagine how I feel about punctuality. I have had to learn to be intentionally late, to ignore it. When my wife says via, I know I've got at least 15 minutes. And rather than slamming the computer shut or my book or whatever and going and say, okay, let's go, we can go now, I've learned to relax and play another game of solitaire and kill the time until she says, we can go now. Don't expect apologies. I kind of went over that earlier. They don't apologize when they do something. We are schooled from the time we're little to say, excuse me, I'm sorry, thank you, and several other social norms. Doesn't happen in this culture. It's very rare. My wife and I have been married 15 years, and she is just learning to say, I'm sorry. That can cause some culture shock. Don't be shy about exploring. Get out and get into the culture, get a little closer. Does everybody know what a pulperia is? Mom and pop store. It's become sophisticated back in North America that they have names called 7-Eleven and Tom Thumb and Junior, and well, here it's not that sophisticated. Many of the pulperias are local. Most of them are local because it's only in the last few years that people have started having cars. They had to walk to the store to get what they wanted, so it needed to be within a block or two. Many of them are owned by Chinese, known to ticos as chinos. This is not derogatory. It's what the chinos call themselves, we chinos. There is a large population of them in this country. Shop in those stores. Their prices are no worse and sometimes better than the big box stores we're used to, like Walmart. And by the way, if you don't know, the grocery store Más o Menos and Pali are Walmart stores, owned and operated. 3 of my kids work for Walmart. They're all over this country. Not my kids, the stores. When I first came here, one of the things that I did, and I was living close to downtown, was I would go into the heart of San Jose, and I would pick out a bus. I couldn't read the sign, and even if I could, I didn't know where whatever it was telling me was. But I'd get on that bus and go wherever it went. The advantage of that was I knew the bus always came back to San Jose, so I couldn't get lost. And I met some very interesting people. I saw some fantastic things. I have tried to go back to some of the sites that I saw from bus and not been able to find them. I have no idea where they were. But it was fun. Bus driver is friendly, the people are friendly. It was a good experience. There are two really, really big things to help you adjust. One is learn Spanish. Now, I don't mean you need to become fluent in Spanish and be able to hold an intellectual conversation at university level. Just basic words. You'd be surprised how many Ticos speak English if you will try to speak Spanish first. They appreciate that, just as we would if the situation were reversed. The second thing is, and the last thing is, resist the temptation to try and change their culture. It is their culture. It's built on family relations and living as a country for hundreds of years. It's not our culture, and it will never be our culture. We need to adapt to them and not them to us. I will leave you with one last quote. This is several years old, actually, but it is as true today as the day it was written. No more than we would appreciate the people coming across the border in the U.S. now, trying to change the North American culture to what they're used to, will these people appreciate us coming here and trying to change the way they live. It's a pretty good way of life. It's not ours. It has some faults, but it is good. And the problem of the snow does not exist here.